As kids, we used to play post office. You know what? The game is over. I'm Larry Fedoruk, and this is Later That Same Life. On each episode of my weekly podcast, a different topic, discussion, or story from our lives.
Season 18, Chapter 6.
The Post Office.
The wonderful traditions of growing up in Canada. The Calgary Stampede, Thanksgiving in October, an annual postal strike. Ah, memories. All right, annual is a bit of an exaggeration. Since the 1950s, I counted only about a dozen postal strikes. Postal workers have a very strong union, CUPW, the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. Do you know, though, there are several unions involved with Canada Post? There's CUPW. That's the biggest one. They represent about 55,000 employees. But then there's the Canadian Postmasters and Assistants Association. This is Canada Post's second largest union, representing anywhere from 8,500 to 12,000 employees who primarily manage post offices in rural areas. Then there's the Association of Postal Officials of Canada. These are about 3,400 Canada Post supervisors. That's right, even the supervisors have a union. There's also the Public Service Alliance of Canada, PSAC. PSAC. They represent about 1,600 administrative, clerical, technical, and various professional roles. Oh, and let's not forget there are Teamsters. They are largely represented in the Purolator division of Canada Post. Almost everyone in Canada Post has a union.
The mail never stops. It just keeps coming and coming and coming. There's never a let-up. It's relentless. Every day it piles up more and more and more, and you got to get it out. And the more you get out, the more it keeps coming in.
And just to be clear, 90% of the time I side with labor unions. It is my belief that if it weren't for labor unions, Canadians would still be working 12-hour days, 7 days a week for about $1 an hour, starting at age 8. I never trust any corporation to be working in the best interest of their employees. That's why workers had to unite. I support them. As a matter of fact, when I drive by a picket line, I toot the horn and give them a thumbs up. Oh yeah, sometimes you just got to take a stand. Do your part. Lately, though, the Canada Post situation seems different. And by lately, I mean most of the 21st century. Let me just say also that I wish everyone who wants one a good-paying job with excellent benefits. Everybody should have fair and reasonable working conditions, and labor should not suffer at the expense of greedy corporate executives and board members. Extreme wage disparity should be illegal. And again, generally I'm in favor of unions. These are things I believe. But Canada Post, I don't know, man. They've been losing hundreds of millions of dollars annually since at least 2018. Projected loss for this year, $1.5 billion. On a side note, don't you hate those people who go, that's billion with a B? Yes, I know, why are you spelling now? It didn't sound like million, it sounded like billion. You don't have to say with a B. You don't say that's million with an M. You don't say that's a gazillion with a gaz. So $1.5 billion with a B, 2025 projected loss for Canada Post. Each time they strike, it seems less and less impactful. I still see people in the lobby of my building checking their mail, as if they didn't know there was a postal strike on, which they likely don't. They're just thinking, no mail, again. Hey, didn't you know there was a postal strike? Oh, geez, I missed that one. Oh, you know what, I'll catch the next one. When a company is bleeding money, the first thing they usually do is cut the labor force. Now, that's not always the correct strategy, but when it comes to Canada Post, what else can they do? Yeah, I guess you could raise the cost of a stamp to $25 a piece. But seriously, Canada Post, thanks for the years of service, but you're actually hanging around a lot longer than you need to be. I do not envy anyone in this situation right now. Tough choices ahead. Canada Post employs about 68,000 people. According to a 2023 report, they have about 22,000 delivery routes for urban, rural, and general mail service. This, of course, requires tens of thousands of pairs of decent walking shoes and a fleet of about 15,000 postal vehicles. Plus, Canada is a geographically massive country. Even though most of us are concentrated within shouting distance of the 49th parallel, we're still trying to provide a postal service to people spread out, as my dad would say, all over Hell's Half Acre. I'm not sure where Hell's Half Acre is, but I seem to remember it's near Edmonton. It's all very expensive. And what makes this arrangement even more troublesome is that Canada Post is a crown corporation. In other words, it's owned by the government of Canada, who generally stays at arm's length when it comes to the day-to-day operation. But let's face it, ultimately, they're the boss. Frankly, I don't know why the government didn't sell it off years ago, especially since it became this drain on government coffers. Well, that's right. We've got coffers. It's bad enough when a government has to inject itself into any labor dispute. But when you are technically the management that workers are striking against, for a government, it's a lose-lose situation. Get out. Sell it. Take your losses and move on like you did with Air Canada, Petro-Canada, and others. Get out of the business. There's parts of my life where I want strong government involvement. You know, things I expect as a taxpayer, health, education, the big two. But mail? I could care less. Because we've developed much better ways of communication than mail delivery. I understand that even in a democratic society, actually especially in a democratic society, a government should oversee all systems of business. These come in the forms of laws, regulations, standards, and practices, by which all must operate, so that when we as Canadians do business, small or large, we can trust them to be fair and honest. Generally, these are the laws of the land passed by a government, but it's upon the whims and wishes of the general population. That's fine, because when we don't like a law or it no longer seems to work, voices carry, laws get changed. But direct government involvement by ownership, that should be extremely limited. Generally, I'm not a fan. I can see how, at one time, governments felt that the sanctity of the mail needed to be protected, which meant having a government-owned and run organization. But that's long gone. Our government did not sell off the mail, though, did they? Well, who knows, maybe they tried and they couldn't get a decent offer. Do you know who has privatized or partially privatized their mail service? Germany, Italy, Portugal, Japan, Malaysia, to name a few. Even the United Kingdom. In the UK, the Royal Mail is privatized. But the retail arm, i.e. the post office, remained state-owned. That's not a bad idea. In almost every transition, there was union backlash, disputes, disruptions, eventually deals, until the new, more efficient system was put into place. By most accounts, privatization of mail service in these nations was considered a resounding success. I understand there were job losses in each case, significant job losses. But is there any other way out? When you have thousands of people doing jobs that we don't need done, what do? You're running a service that by and large is no longer required by the majority of the population. And still, clumsily, in Canada, our government is in this business. Recently, our government called upon Canada Post to increase efficiencies across the board. And the main item, end door-to-door delivery over the next few years. Oh, you'd still get mail addressed to your home, but Canada Post would be tasked with setting up a system of community mailboxes, the likes of which many of us have already seen in these newly developed housing projects. Actually, the conversion to community mailboxes, if you remember, was already underway in Canada, and as a matter of fact was suspended in 2015 after converting only about 500,000 addresses to these mailboxes, who had previously had delivery right to the door. Their goal was 5 million addresses, so they barely scratched the surface. Community mailboxes seem like a good idea. Certainly, as you're planning a new neighborhood, the place and the space for a community mailbox can be worked in ahead of time. But for existing small, medium, and large urban areas, what do you do? Where do you put them? You have to acquire that little piece of land. It has to be easily accessible, but not in a place where it'll block existing traffic or other infrastructure, or put people in harm's way while they're picking up their mail. Some people will want to access it by car, but you can't block traffic. People who want to access it on foot don't want them in busy vehicular zones. And of course, no one wants one in front of their own house. The noise, the traffic, the junk mail blowing in the wind. So that's a problem right there. The cost? Well, in new areas, that's usually paid for by the developer to Canada Post. Let's do some easy math here. Each community mailbox costs at least $200 per address to build. Each one has about 50 addresses or mailboxes per setup. To convert those 5 million addresses, that's $1 billion. Granted, there's long-term savings, but who's coming up with that $1 billion right now? $1 billion for a project that would take years to complete. And I guarantee you, like with any type of construction, the cost ends up being way more than first estimated. It's a huge project that would involve a lot of time and a lot of money. Canada Post doesn't have very much of either right now. Community mailboxes by themselves, not a bad idea. Good way to save money in the long run. It would lead to a more efficient delivery system. But how about this? Instead of having these unsightly suburban service structures dotted around the streets, serving 50 or so addresses, why not 200? But they're inside some existing infrastructure. The library, the community center, a church, a drugstore, other retail. Heck, they'd probably appreciate the foot traffic. I grew up in a town of 1,000 people. We had one post office. The mail didn't come to you. You went to get the mail. For the first 15 years of my life, my address was a post office box. My street address was the 2-story house on the corner across from the high school. Look for the orange garage door. Kind of hard to fit all of that on an envelope. Anyway, you'd still incur the cost of the setup, but it would be less because you'd have fewer locations with more mailboxes each. Well, that's not as convenient. Well, who cares? The reason we're even talking about this is because we really don't need the mail anymore. Letter delivery has gone way, way down. There's less and less mail to deliver. And it costs pretty much the same for a postal worker to fire up the truck and go on his route, whether they've got 10 letters or 100. And in the case of inabilities, you're not able to get out to a community mailbox? Well, if you can't get someone to pick up your mail for you, you could apply for a special dispensation to get mail to your door at a low or no postal fee. It would also mean that you'd only get mail once or twice a month. And let's face it, you don't need mail more often than that. And how many of these special dispensations do you think there'd be per area? I'll bet not very many. I also had this idea that, frankly, I don't even know would work, but I'm going to float it out there anyway. A return to the post office. So in a post office, instead of 50 or even 200 mailboxes, you'd have like 500. And you'd also have a retail space. And the retail space would sell stamps and envelopes and packaging the way they do now at those kiosks at the drugstores. But they could sell other things too, Canadiana souvenirs, other tchotchkes, perhaps even a side coffee bar with free Wi-Fi. Make it a community hub. And this could work both in urban and rural. I don't know. Look, there's just a few ideas there. I do know you have to stop putting out fires and start thinking about rewiring the panel to avoid future flare-ups. Think future. I said, imagine what would have happened that in 1993, when we all started to get email, if Canada Post had said to themselves, mail, that's what we do. Maybe we should invest in email infrastructure. You want electronic email? Sign up with Canada Post right now for low-cost email accounts. Sounds crazy today, but 40 years ago, we would have accepted this as the norm. And I'll bet many of us to this day would still have Canada Post email accounts. But they didn't, did they? They didn't realize what business they were in. They focused on their little letters and packages. They ignored the electronic revolution. Now they're being stifled by their own ignorance. And they're going through cash like there's no tomorrow, which there might not be. Speaking of packages, Canada Post owns a 91% majority share in Purolator. Purolator makes money. Profits between 100 and 200 million per year. A small change compared to Amazon or even UPS. And those profits disappear into the void of a parent company that runs huge deficits. But why don't we hear about the focus on growing that business so that maybe it could actually subsidize some form of regular mail? Oh, and remember, we call it snail mail because next to everything else it is. That is just not a good image on which to build a solid company. Canada Post, when it absolutely, positively has to be there sometime in the next 6 to 8 weeks. So to summarize, first, get the government out of the postal business. Privatize. Next, get the Postal Service mostly out of the postal business. We don't need it. There are much easier ways of getting letters and documents. Focus on your package delivery. Sorry, you're going to lose a lot of people. Why don't you ask the fax machine repairman what he did to reinvent himself and move on?
Tell me, how come you never got married?
It's unfair to ask a woman to be the wife of a mailman. Watch them get up every morning, strapping on that old mailbag, going out and hitting those mean streets, never knowing whether he's coming back or not.
And there will be the unions. They will fight mightily. But even they have to start realizing, hey, we represent the blacksmiths of our day. It's over. Part of the problem in accepting this is that there's still enough of us around for whom mail is very nostalgic. Letters, the post office. I used to have pen pals. I'd meet a girl from another town, and your parents didn't want you to run up the long-distance phone bill, so you'd write letters to each other, sealed with a kiss. I remember rushing home from school so that I'd be the first one to get to the mail, so that I could scurry off any personal letter to my room before my nosy parents started asking questions. And I'd read those letters dozens of times, and I'd spend hours composing a letter back. I can only hope that none of these girls kept these letters, because I feel now they'd be very embarrassing to me. In our family, and heck, even I did this when I got married, every November you'd buy 2 or 3 boxes of Christmas cards, like 40 or 50 of them. And you designate one night where you dutifully sit down and go through an address book, address all these envelopes, write a personal message in each greeting card, and send a Christmas card to every aunt, uncle, cousin, co-worker, friend, or anything you'd ever had. Families took special Christmas card portraits. Some would compose a family Christmas newsletter of everything that happened to them in the past year. John is now foreman at the factory, and Margie got her hiking badge in the Girl Guides. Oh, how nice. And every Christmas card you received stood proudly on the mantle and the tables throughout the holiday season, part of the decorations. You'd hang them on strings on your walls to make a garland. You could set your watch by the mailman. Oh, it's 11:30, still no mail. Gee, I hope everything's okay. In my building, we get the mail around 2 o'clock. By 2:30, it's a party down there. All the seniors gathered around comparing flyers. It's a scene, man. It's all very romantic and nostalgic. But the thing about nostalgia, it's so yesterday. Bread and milk used to get delivered right to your door as well, but they weaned us off that too. After a while, it was like, hey, when you need it, go get it yourself. I watched an old Letterman clip recently where he was doing his regular feature, Viewer Mail. It struck me that today I watch hosts read their own social media posts instead. Even at the end of this podcast, I don't ask for cards and letters. I give you an email address option. If you don't want to do that, well, send me a telegram.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.